Here's what our conclusion is. Starting the video with the conclusion. And I got that sitting here in our 5 valve per cylinder head that had a whole bunch of cracks in it, and our replacement head that does not. It's going in Audi. And here's the car that we're working on. It's a 2005 Mazda 6. And this Mazda has the big 3.0 liter 6-cylinder. So we got this car and it had a whole bunch of trouble codes, most of them related to lean. We did basic checks, you know, we did sprayed the intake manifold for looking for vacuum leaks that would affect fuel trim, and we smoked the intake system looking for vacuum leaks. We never did do a fuel pressure test. Years ago I was taught to do a wide open throttle load test and see what happens when you floor it, and this car, if you did floor it, did not lack power, did not fall on its face. A fuel pump that's failing will generally not be able to provide enough fuel during the wide open throttle event to keep the car going, and this car ran just fine during that circumstance. The car does have some drivability symptoms. It drives like it's lean. You know, when you accelerate off a stop, it stumbles, and after the fuel trims get maxed out, it runs better. But if you reset the fuel trims, by the way, the fuel trims on this car don't want to reset unless you disconnect the battery and touch the terminals together. They do not reset when you clear codes. At least the long term doesn't. When we got the car, fuel trims were at 20 plus on the long term, both banks, and during most circumstances they were at 20 plus on the short term also. We do have Identifix, and we punched in some of the codes in Identifix, and they pointed to this quite frequently failing, being split, and that wasn't the case on ours. And the back down inside there, you're not going to be able to see it, but it's down there. The purge solenoid being stuck open, drawing air through that, making basically a vacuum leak that you can't find. Well, that it's a simple test for that. This is the hose right here that goes to the purge solenoid, and we closed that off, and it did not change our lean fuel trims. Our oxygen sensor showed lean all the time, and we could force it rich. What we were doing to do that was we'd disconnect this hose here, and we'd spray in there to enrich in it, and when we did that, both oxygen sensors did go to rich. So we know they're at least working a little bit, but continuously and repeatedly it would just continually go lean. There was some weird behavior with the fuel trims, to where the fuel trims would ramp upwards and then drop down, and then ramp upwards and drop down. I don't know why it was doing that, but I think we finally solved our problem, as I hinted to with the vial that we showed earlier. I guess I need to show you what this car is doing. Not much to see here from the driver's seat, but maybe you can hear the RPM of the engine. I'll turn on lights here so you can see the tach. As it starts up, seems like it starts up okay and runs okay. Sometimes it'll stumble. I'm going to give it some R's. Of course, we're running okay right now. Let's go look at the fuel trims. This car is not warmed up. The car literally just stumbled and almost died, and I missed it on the video. I did not get it. Oh, there it was. Did you hear that? I'm going to go ahead and go to codes menu. Can you hear all that stumbling going on? It ran much better once. It ran much better when it first came in, because the long term had adapted, and right now we have had to clear fuel trims at one point, and the long term has not changed since then. Try and pull up some fuel trim data here, show you what this thing is doing. This car has been running for a while, so it should be warmed up with the O2 sensors heated up. And I'm going to select just the data that we want here. Bank 1 front O2, Bank 2 front O2, short term, long term, short term, long term on the other bank. You can see here both our O2s are reading extremely lean, not even 0.1 volt, although it does seem like it's fluctuating here. It's only fluctuating between 0.015 and 0.020. Both of them are almost exactly the same. Short term isn't active, long term hasn't adapted since we've cleared it. And scroll down to the other bank, and short term is not active and long term has not adapted there either. Now these things don't adapt when the codes trigger, and this thing has triggered some codes. So if you see here, this is on bank 1, this is on bank 2. So I'm going to clear those and see if the fuel trim will go active. This time I'm just going to pull up the sensor voltage and short term for both banks. You see it's still not active. I'm going to restart the car and see if it goes active now. Okay, so you can see now short term is just ramping upwards because the O2 sensor voltage is so lean. It ramped up all the way to 25 and then it dropped down. I don't know why it drops down there. Long term isn't changing because I've watched this behavior happen a few times. Long term isn't changing, so it's not like it's changing long term and then readjusting short term. I don't know why it's behaving like this. You can hear the motor stumble too when this drop down happens, but it's definitely I would say the code has reoccurred now because short term has defaulted to 0. And let's check long term just so I can prove to you what I'm saying here. Oops, I pushed the wrong button, my bad, but we can get back to it. Long term, long term. And you see they're still at 0. So, has anyone figured out what the cause of the fuel trim problem and the drivability problem is on this Mazda? I hinted around with the vial at the beginning of the video, and it turns out that this has E85 in it. Once we suck all the fuel out, or maybe we'll just jumper the fuel pump on to pump all the fuel out of it. Okay, I have taken the fuel pump relay out of right there. There sits the fuel pump relay, and I have jumpered 12 volts to the fuel pump through that relay. I have the fuel line disconnected right there, and the fuel pump is running, pumping fuel into there. Of course, it looks like our fuel tank is almost at 3/4 tank. We're about 8 gallons into pumping the fuel out of this tank, and it's showing about that much here. Seems to be not very steady flow right now, but it's still coming out, so I'm going to keep letting it pump. Okay, I finished up pumping the contaminated fuel out of this car, and I've refilled it with approximately 5 gallons of fuel. And I have not started it yet. I'll start it up and see if it runs any better, and we'll look at the fuel trims. Of course, the battery is dead because I've drained all the battery juice, using the battery to pump the fuel. Okay, I'm getting ready to start it. I did go ahead and clear codes and pull up short-term fuel trims and voltage on the O2 sensors. Let's see what happens here. I understand there's probably a certain amount of alcohol still in the bottom of the tank, and the 5 gallons of fuel that I put in dilute it enough, but hopefully after these sensors come alive and some of the dregs come out of the bottom of it, maybe it'll start running good. Obviously the first thing we'll need to do after we get done here is go fill it up with a full tank of gasoline. Okay, first thing I want to point out is that okay, fuel trims are going up. It did go up. Oxygen sensor is now active, going high and low. I'm not saying that fuel trims at 14 is a good thing, but if you remember before, it would ramp up and then stay high and then drop down again and then ramp up again. Whereas this time it ramped up and came under control. I suppose it's entirely possible this car has another problem. Maybe, for instance, the purge valve. But at this point, this is much better than what it was before. Okay, I did just pull up long-term fuel trim, and I wanted to record this while I could. The short-term was pretty high. It ramped up, and then right here, long-term dropped down to like 19, or long-term went up to 19, short-term came down to like normal. So what we're dealing with now is a fuel system that works, but we do definitely still have a lean problem. And if I scroll down, I'm sure we'll see the same thing on bank 2. Yeah, exactly. It ramped upwards, dropped down, and long-term came up. Okay, I do want to say the long-terms are up high, but this is at least a fuel system that is in fuel control. I'm not saying that long-term being as high as it is okay, but at least the fuel system is capable of bringing the fuel system under control. Whereas when I had it before, it would not bring it under control. It would try and try again, and then the pending code would stop the O2 sensor activity from actually, or at least this is my theory, that once the pending code triggered, that the fuel system would no longer try and control the short term or the long term. So I think this is generally fixed, and my theory right now is that maybe the purge solenoid it does have a problem, or maybe the fuel is not a high enough percentage because there was so much residual in the bottom of the tank. Fuel is not high enough percentage of gasoline to make it to where it'll run correctly, or the fuel trims will still be out of whack. What I'm going to do, I think our local gas station does have a zero alcohol pump, and we're going to go and we're going to fill this car up with zero alcohol fuel and see what happens from there. By the way, the acceleration off idle is much better. Doesn't seem to hesitate or stumble like it was before. We'll see how it drives. I don't really want to get out and video while I'm outside, but you can see there that pump says, or can you see it? Premium, no ethanol. That red pump there. Whereas the regular 3, 87, 89, and 91 all have some percentage of ethanol in it. It's not required by law here to announce that it has ethanol in it unless it's over like 5% or some low number. Of course, I did fill it all the way up, 10 plus gallons of fuel. Okay, I'm pulled over on the side of the road here, and what I'm noticing is that those short terms are going in the negative quite frequently, and the long term there has dropped from about 21 to 17. See, those short terms are going -3 quite frequently, and so the long term is going to drop over time, and that's probably because there's less alcohol in the tank now. As this car runs further and further, I'm pretty sure those long terms will drop down. They've even dropped down one more point since we've been talking here. So we'll see what they are when I get back to the shop. Okay, Okay, I am back at the shop, and as you can see, the long term has dropped all the way down to 14. I still am seeing a downward trend. You just see -2 there on the short term, so the 14 is going to drop some more if that negative trend continues. I want everyone to understand. You can see there the sticker on the window. I did do this work for a used car lot. Obviously, the used car lot would like it back faster, but they brought me a tough problem to fix after their mechanic gave up on it. They have an in-house mechanic, and he gave up on it because he couldn't find any problem, and so I struggled with it as well. This is the first time I've ever encountered an ethanol in a non-ethanol car. A little bit further test driving has brought the fuel trim on the long term down to about 3. You can see here the fuel trim was negative on the short term, and at this point right here the long term dropped way down. And so now I would say that it's pretty much running good, and fuel trims are in a tolerable state, and I think we can ship this car with peace of mind knowing that it's 100% fixed. This is the Bank 2 fuel trims, and fuel trim's pretty normal there, so should be a good fix. I do want to point out that the repairs done on this car were done for the used car lot that is down the street from us there, and they brought it to us after their mechanic had struggled with it and given up on it. So despite the fact I've had it a month, it isn't hurting anyone that I had the car that long. I didn't really spend a month on it. I just, every time I came up empty-handed, I would put the car aside and let it sit for a few days. Spent a lot of time thinking about it, a lot of time talking about it, but not really a lot of time on the car itself. I never encountered a problem like this before where ethanol was in a non-E85 car. I think this is excellent experience for me because I now know that I probably should check for ethanol content in the fuel long before, earlier in the process than I ever would have before. But I've learned a lot from it, and I was debating whether or not to even share this video because it was such a butt kicker. I certainly could have manipulated the data and made it look like I nailed the diagnosis in the first place, but I didn't think that would be a realistic experience, nor would it be honest. I don't think that would be honest to portray it that way. I think it's much more interesting this way because anybody could run into this. It could be on a Volkswagen car, and I don't know for sure if Volkswagen has any E85 cars. I don't think that they do, so this very easily could happen on a Volkswagen. So I want to point out how I actually solved the problem on this. I kept checking for the normal fuel trim related, the normal lean condition problems, and what kept coming up empty. I didn't feel like it was fuel pump. I really didn't have any way of checking fuel pressure on this. My fuel pressure set does not hook to this type of fitting on this car. So my wide open throttle test had to be sufficient, and even with the ethanol, the car ran great at wide open throttle. So I felt like couldn't be really a problem with fuel delivery because at wide open throttle, requires more flow and pressure than at any other circumstance. So I didn't feel like a fuel pressure test was needed, but check for vacuum leaks, check for open purge solenoid, check for unmetered air leaks, and all those things came up empty. And eventually I just my mind just had to come up with the answer. Identifix didn't give me the answer. The internet didn't give me the answer. I do remember sitting at a seminar at one point and them teaching me that alcohol does, or E85 does cause fuel trims to show lean because it has less energy in it than gasoline. And eventually I just remembered that, and that's how I diagnosed it. So I'm a little bit proud of the fact that I diagnosed it. I didn't get on the phone and call neighboring shops and ask them what they would do. Matter of fact, I almost never do that. I don't really have a network of friends of neighboring shops to call. So I do have a couple guys, but I almost never call them. So I am kind of proud of how I figured it out on my own, through thought process, through logical diagnostic method. I did put a mass airflow sensor on it that it didn't need, but at that point I was a little bit frustrated. I had a little bit of evidence that the mass airflow sensor was a little bit goofy, but it did absolutely nothing. It was a waste of time. I'm going to put the original one back on. I'm not charging the customer for it. So if you learned anything from this video, or you'd like to see more diagnosis videos, click on my website at www.kansascitytdi.com. If you'd like to financially contribute to the continued production of these videos, find the donate icon there. Okay, I'm back to trying to finish this video. Anyway, my test was very clear cut. Probably can't see it now because this has been hanging around for a day or so, and I don't know what's going on with it, but before it was very clear cut. There was a line up here, and about 85% of the space was taken up with alcohol and water, and only 15% or so was taken up with fuel at the top. So very clearly it was E85.